Hello, everyone. I'm John Sanford, and I'm a board member of Logos Research Associates. Logos Research Associates is an international fellowship of Christian scholars. Our studies help to demonstrate that good scholarship consistently affirms biblical truth. Today, we'll be hearing from one of our most distinguished scholars, Dr. Randall Price. So before I transfer this to him, I'd like to touch briefly on his credentials. He has awesome credentials, especially in the topics that we're going to be talking about today. So Dr. Price's credentials include Master of Theology in Hebrew and Semitic languages from Dallas Theological Seminary, a PhD from Middle Eastern Studies, the Hebrew University of Texas, a postdoc at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is now executive director of the Center for Judaic Studies. He is a distinguished research professor at Liberty University. He is founder and president of World of the Bible Ministries, and one of the few scholars who has studied the Dead Sea Scrolls in depth. So I'd just like to add to that some of Dr. Price's books. Some of his books include Unholy War, Israel and Radical Islam, Fast Facts on the Middle East Conflict, What Should We Think About Israel, The Battle for the Temple Mount, and then his most recent book, Jerusalem in Prophecy, which was published just a few years ago. Jerusalem in Prophecy is a book that I've been reading, and what I found really striking was chapter 7. Some of you might be interested in his excellent book. The title is Dark Before the Dawn, The Rise of Jerusalem's Enemies. So I think that seems very fitting. And so now, Randall, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm glad that I was invited to present this topic at this time because it's a time of crisis. It's a time of conflict. It's a time of confusion for many people as they look at the events transpiring not just in Israel and with the Palestinians, but also really the global response to this. Mm-hmm. So I thought it'd be well if we could just talk about this together with a few questions, and I would respond with answers.
All right, let's move to the questions then. I think we may have a technical glitch. Let's proceed. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Zach, who is helping us from the background. Okay, why this war and why now? That's a question for you, Dr.
Yes.
Randall. Dr. Randall Price.
Yeah, let me just say that why this war? Well, it's quite a war. It's probably the worst that Israel has experienced since the Holocaust. They call it Israel's Pearl Harbor. Israel's called it its 9/11. With 1,500 Israelis killed, many on just one day. By equivalent with our population statistics, about 50,000 people killed in a day. So you can understand how that affects the entire culture. Almost everyone in Israel knew someone, was related to someone who was massacred. 5,000 people wounded, and still some of those critical condition. And then 222 kidnapped, being used perhaps to ransom for some of the Hamas terrorists that are in Israel's prisons right now, which would be a horrible thing if that kind of transfer happened, because they would be effective in making this conflict even greater than it is because of their expertise and their connections. Let me just say that because of what happened on October 7th, Israel declared war. It has not been in a state of war since 1973. For those who may not have much background on this, you've seen in the rhetoric through protest, talking about Zion, and these people are anti-Zionist. They're against what is they consider usurpation of land. The term Zion is a term for Israel. It refers to the homeland of the Jewish people. When we talk about Zion, this is the promised home of the Jewish people, and those who believe that this is the promised home of the Jewish people are Zionist. Whether you're a Jew, whether you're a Gentile, you're a Zionist. If you're Jewish by religion, you can be a secular Jew, a religious Jew. If you're a Christian, you could be a Christian Zionist. Whatever the case, someone who recognizes this as a fact of history, not just biblical history, but also current modern political history, would be recognized as a Zionist. So it's a political term, but before that, it was a spiritual term. When we think about some of the facts, and of course we'd be here all night if we talked about all of the different issues that are in dispute, but just here are some facts about Israel and the Palestinians, and some of these you may not have heard. First, before 1948, the Jews were the Palestinians. The people who occupied this part of the Middle East under the 400 years of the Ottoman Empire were a variety of people. They came from many different nationalities. Some were Egyptian, some were Syrian, some, of course, were Turkish. They were just from all over. They were Bedouins, came from the area of Saudi Arabia. But in terms of who the Palestinians were, it went back to the ancient name that the Romans gave for this country when they assumed control. They changed the name from Israel to Syria Palestinea, Palestine being a derogative term drawn from Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines. And so even when the Jews came back in the 19th century, early 20th century, and began returning to the land, particularly after the events of the Holocaust, they were called Palestinians. You could be a Palestinian Jew, you could be a Palestinian Arab. Whoever lived in the land could have that name because that was the place. But often when they referred to the Arabs as Palestinians, they said, don't call us that, that is the Jews. Now, after 1948, when Israel became a state, now you have the state of Israel. So Jews in Israel become Israeli Jews, and Arabs that live within Israel proper become Israeli Arabs. Those left outside still had various nationalities, but eventually, through political endeavors of the Palestine resistance or the Palestinian, the PLO, Liberation Organization, later become the Palestinian Authority, they decided to group together and give themselves the name Palestinian, since that wasn't being used any longer. And so that's where we get the present group called the Palestinians. All of the rhetoric that says they lived in the land for thousands and thousands of years from time immemorial, and that the Jews were interlopers and occupiers that took over their land in some way, is simply a fiction. It's a revisionist history that has no place in real scholarly understanding. Now, between 1948 and 67, Gaza, which is at the center of our conversation, was under Egypt. The whole Gaza Strip was controlled by Egypt, just as the West Bank was controlled by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Because what happened in 48, in the war, there were attacks on this new fledgling state of Israel, and the land was divided by those who had conquered it. Egypt got Gaza, Jordan got the West Bank. So what we call Palestinians, who may have lived in those areas, were under their control. And so this was the situation. After 1967, another war, then because of Israel's victory again, just like it had a victory in 48, the Israeli government controlled, let's say loosely, because it was considered disputed territory by the rest of the world. They governed Gaza and the West Bank. They developed Gaza. They put hotels there. It was really a wonderful place. The Jews began to settle there as part of land. The same thing in the West Bank. But later, as the Palestinian Authority began to negotiate with Israel, control was given in part to them. When we come to the present situation with Gaza, we have to remember that since 2005, Gaza has been autonomous. There's been no control with Israel. Under Ariel Sharon, there was a withdrawal from Gaza of all Jews. The military took them out kicking and screaming from their settlements, and they turned the entire place over to the government of the Palestinian Authority. But in that same year, just right after that, you had a situation where Hamas, another faction of the Palestinians, stepped in and violently overthrew the Palestinian Authority. They threw leaders of the Palestinian Authority off of buildings, murdered them. And I was in the country when this happened. I heard them on television crying for help. Eventually, they relocated entirely to Ramallah. And so we have Fatah, the organization that our United States has primarily negotiated with all of these years in the West Bank. And then Hamas has been always declared a terrorist organization. And yet, the Palestinians across the board had a democratic election, and they elected Hamas as their legitimate government. So that has been the case. So since 2005, everything that has happened in Gaza has been under the control and the responsibility and the consequences that have been suffered have been under their own government, which they elected. As late as 2021, something like 64% of the Gazans still supported Hamas and were completely for it. But right after 2000, right after the Hamas took control of Gaza, they began sending Katyusha rockets into all of the settlements around them in Israel proper. It became a siege situation from Gaza. So these are the facts that we need to understand, because when you see all the posters and the protest and the rhetoric, you have to understand none of that is based on actual historical fact. Now, there are theories as to why the war now. When we talk about these, one is a resistance to Israel's ongoing occupation of Gaza and Palestine. In other words, the belief, the revisionist historical belief, is that this was always a Palestinian city and civilization. I mean, in fact, there never has been a Palestinian civilization. They do not have their own language. They don't have their own culture. They don't have their own state. They're simply a modern construct in these days. But based on the belief that somehow Israel occupied Gaza and still occupies Gaza and oppresses Gaza, there has been the belief that this war erupted. Another view is that because of Israel's attempt to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, America was brokering this. This is part of the Abraham Accords. This was not wanted by some factions in the Islamic world. And so the result was they fomented this war to thwart this. Another explanation was U.S. appeasement of Iranian policies. Iran is the backer of all of these groups, these terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East, but the United States trying to move in directions for normalization with Iran, thinking it would help mobilize some type of peaceful situation throughout the Middle East. That's hard to believe, but that's the belief. This attack came as well. Now, let's look at some of the facts about this. Why now? Why on October 7th? Well, symbolic dates are important in the Islamic Holy War agenda. And on October 7th, it was the 50th anniversary of the last surprise attack on Israel, which was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So this was done in the same way, on the same kind of time, at the end of the high holidays, at a time when it was Shabbat in Israel, in a surprise way. It was also the 43rd anniversary of the Palestinian assassination of Anwar Sadat, who made peace with Israel back in 1981. And this is, of course, something that they stand against. It was also the 38th anniversary of the Palestinian attack on the Italian cruise ship back in '85. And if you remember that event, they rounded up all of the Jewish passengers, some in wheelchairs, and threw them over the sides of the ship. And it was also the 22nd anniversary of the U.S.-led attack on Afghanistan, so that the United States would dare to invade or become part of an attack on an Islamic country. They took up this mantle of resistance, and then, as I said, it was significant on the Jewish calendar because after a month-long time of holidays, our Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, everything rolled into one, with times of observance in which no one works, all traffic is shut down, nothing is open, nothing moves. That's when they made their attack. So that takes care, I think, for at least a brief explanation of why this war and why now.
All right. So let's go to the next question. What is the real cause of this war?
All right, well, the real cause of this war is going to help explain a little more about why this war came now. And to do this, we're going to have to talk about the elephant in the room. If you listen to the mainstream media, if you even listen to a lot of the conservative media, you're not hearing this given, the real cause of the war. So let me tell you what that is. That's religion. As one side says, religion is something we don't talk about. It's used by uneducated people as a weapon to divide as opposed to connect with each other. And of course, that's because we have this multicultural, pluralistic society in which all religions are deemed equal, and we cannot in some way speak negatively about one religion. Of course, we understand that all religions can't be right because they contradict each other. Okay? They could all be wrong, but one could be right. And so resolving that, Chuck Colson said, many people are trying to remove religion from public life, but under this banner of pluralism or culture and political things, but you can't push all talk about God out of the public arena. You cannot explain what's going on now without understanding the religious cause. So let's look at this. Hamas, who started this conflict, there's others involved now, but who started it, have in their charter the statement that it is necessary to instill in the minds of the Muslim generations that the Palestinian problem is a religious problem and should be dealt with on this basis. So forget the idea of this as a national problem or political problem. No, it's a religious problem. And without that understanding, you cannot deal effectively with this. As I said, it's not just Hamas, it is really all of these organizations that consider jihad the way to settle their issues between Islam and Israel or the United States or any of the Western world. So just today, leaders of Lebanon's Hezbollah held talks with senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad leaders. Okay, they are meeting together, not only to support one another, but to plan what the next stage of attack might be. The Palestinian Authority, which we consider to be non-terrorist, which are the ones we negotiate with, let's just say they're not any different. They're headed up by President Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas and others issued a statement right on October 7th when this terrible massacre occurred. They praised Hamas' terror massacre and called all hostages settlers. In fact, their belief is there are no non-combatants, there are no civilians, since every Jew, when they finish high school, goes into the military. Women go for about 3 years. Men go a little longer in there in the reserve duty, as all are reservists up until their 50s. And so they consider everybody a combatant, even from the time of their being babies, because if they're not yet soldiers, they will be soldiers. So they look at them in that way. There's no innocence in their minds. But Mahmoud Abbas, who heads the Palestinian Authority, let's look how modern he might be. He was co-founder with Yasser Arafat of the PLO. He claimed responsibility for many of the suicide bombings and terrorist attacks. He supported and wrote the paychecks for the Palestinian terrorists who murdered the 11th Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics. He earned his doctorate from the University of Moscow for a dissertation argued that the Holocaust was an invention of the Jews to gain international sympathy for the creation of the Jewish state. And he campaigned alongside Islamic Jihad and Hamas terrorists, calling them heroes and Israel the Zionist enemy. So we'll have to make up our own mind about how modern we think he may be. He and all of these actors from the Palestinian side are part of Wahhabi Islam. That represents about 90% of Muslims worldwide because that represents Sunni Islam. Now, let me tell you what Wahhabism is. It's a radical sect of Islam founded in the 18th century by the Arabian national reformer Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Wahhab looked at the situation with Islam in his day. He saw that they began to settle, become more civilized. They began to make contributions in the arts and sciences. This would be considered by us the golden age of Islam. But for him, the golden age of Islam was the revolutionary Islam when jihad was conquering the world. He wanted to go back to that. So he sought to reverse the century-old decline of the Muslim empire by removing the cultural pollution of Western influence, returning Islam to his idea of a past golden age where the Quran was interpreted literally and Islamic law was fundamentally practiced and strictly enforced. As a literal interpretation of the Quran, the Hadith, the Sunnah, Wahhabi theology promotes offensive jihad. That's it. You take the battle to the enemy and promises heavenly reward in paradise with celestial matings for jihadic martyrs. You heard about some of this in 9/11 with those who were the suicide bombers. Okay, in the year 1744, Muhammad ibn Saud, who was the local ruler of Daria, a town north of Riyadh, embraced Wahhab's teachings and the two swore an oath of allegiance to spread this purified faith throughout Arabia. In pure form, Wahhabism is a death cult, which has spearheaded the violent revolutionary overthrow of Islamic countries such as Afghanistan, whose local government was replaced with radical Taliban rule under Sharia law. All right, if you think of Saudi Arabia, who right now we were trying to normalize relations with, they are the protectors and promoters of Wahhabi Islam throughout the world. Now, Ibn Waraq, who was a former Muslim and wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Muslim, put it this way: there may be moderate Muslims, but Islam itself is not moderate. There is no difference between Islam and Islamic fundamentalism. At most, there's a difference of degree, but not of kind. Islamic fundamentalism is a totalitarian construct derived by Muslim jurists from the fundamental and defining text of Islam. Islamic fundamentalism has global aspirations, the submission of the entire world to the all-embracing Sharia, that is Islamic law, a fascist system of dictates designed to control every single act of all individuals, which is why this part of the Middle East is controlled by this, has no concept of democracy, no concept of individual rights. It cannot by definition. You look at the Hamas covenant made in 1988, they say the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews. Jihad becomes the individual duty of every Muslim. So we begin to understand that the young men who broke through the fence, went to Kibbutz Gaza, and slaughtered these people, on one hand, were not really animals, monsters. They were people who themselves are perhaps fathers and husbands, but they did this out of a religious duty, an obligation, because they were convinced in their mind that to uphold the Quran, to defend the Quran, it was absolutely necessary they act in this way. Now, let's get to the real cause religiously of the attack. And here we see it. On October 7th, Hamas issued this. This is Ismail Haniyeh, who is the head of Hamas. He said, "We have achieved a victory in the battle for Jerusalem, the defense of Jerusalem." He later added, "Jerusalem is the axis of this conflict." Now, how many of you have heard that? Because they didn't attack Jerusalem. None of the missiles have reached Jerusalem. It seems to be about something else, but not from their perspective. You can go back to 2021 when he said the same thing, when they started a huge rocket barrage from Gaza into parts of Israel. He claimed it as a victory in the battle for Jerusalem. And not just that. If you look at Hamas's logo, you can see that their insignia has within it the very center, the Dome of the Rock, which is at the center of Jerusalem, the holy site. And it has two crossed swords, which means that the way you liberate this holy site is through jihad, through war. Listen to what was happening just before this attack. This was during the high holidays. This was back in 2022. And so Jews were beginning to visit the Temple Mount for the first time. It's coming out of COVID. There had been a few groups going up. This was against the status quo agreement, but the Muslims had already violated that by building a new mosque and doing all kinds of things on the Temple Mount. So Jews said, why can't we go pray at the holiest site in all of Judaism? They did that under police guard, but they went up. This was considered a violation of Islamic sanctity, and Hamas threatened then violence over these Jewish visits. You can hear what they were saying. This is a blatant attack on the religious and Islamic status of the city and the mosque, and Israel bears full responsibility for the possibility of dragging the entire region into an open religious war. Now, let's talk about this a little more, because here you listen to the Grand Mufti, the Palestinian Grand Mufti. He incited masses and tried to inflame them over Temple Mount tensions. This was just in August of this year. He said the occupation authorities, that is the Jews, are attempting to execute their extremist settlerist plan to put their hands on the Blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque as part of the series of extremist acts that the occupying authorities and extremists are carrying out to harm Jerusalem and the Blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is in order to tighten their control over them and build the alleged temple. Heaven forbid. He warned against the consequences of this aggression and against the outbreak of a fierce religious war. So we'll look a little more at this, but here, again, on October 7th, here's the Times of Israel reporting. They said the Hamas commander says the attacks are in defense of Al-Aqsa. That's why he sent 5,000 missiles against Israel. And they called this, from October 7th, Operation Al-Aqsa Deluge, or a flood of resistance against the occupation of Al-Aqsa, which is the term they use for the foreign mosque, which is the Temple Mount. And so he claimed that the operation was launched in retaliation for Israel's desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And he asked the Palestinians living in East Jerusalem to join forces and expel occupiers and demolish the walls. And in fact, on October 7th and 8th, there were those who listened to this call and went into various Jewish neighborhoods trying to find people to kill. So let's think about the Temple Mount for a moment. Jews occupy and control Jerusalem. It's under the sovereignty of the State of Israel since 1967 and since 1980 when they reunified Jerusalem. But the Gentiles, that is the Arab Muslims, occupy and control the Temple Mount. Thinking about this biblically, Luke 21:24 says, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, that didn't happen in 1967 because what we call the walled old city, which has at its center on the eastern side the Temple Mount, remained under Islamic control. That control was ceded back to the Muslim Authority right after the Six-Day War. And so it never has come directly under Israel's control. And that was, in the ancient days, all that Jerusalem actually was. The modern Jerusalem we see is all outside the walls and has grown up since the 19th century AD. So the Arabs are Gentiles, and despite Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem, Israel does not exercise actual control over East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And yet, when we talk about this, these sites are still contested because Jews are down at the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. The negotiations in 67 came up with the idea of the Jews below, the Muslims above. So, but even the Wailing Wall is not considered Jewish by Islam. It's the place where Muhammad tied his celestial steed, al-Buraq, when he made a night journey to the far mosque, which they interpret to be Jerusalem. And the Temple Mount is called Haram al-Sharif, and the Dome of the Rock, which is the actual site of the temple, is called Kubet al-Sakra, and the whole area is called Al-Aqsa, based on Surah 17, which talks about Muhammad's night journey. So all of these are contested sites, and that is what is considered part of the battle. When you look at the propaganda that is given, even though the Temple Mount belongs and is strictly controlled by the Muslim authorities, even from an archaeological point of view, they control everything. No one gets involved with that. They've had it for 1,300 years, and they've had it through all the political disputes between they and the Israelis. And yet, when you look at the propaganda, you see someone like Hamas breaking forth to try to kill the occupier, the little Satan. Obviously, there's the United States on this side, the great Satan. We're together in this, who are occupying the Dome of the Rock and preventing, obviously, the Palestinians from worship there, which is absolutely untrue. If you look at this, every Ramadan you have 300,000 or more Palestinians and others come to worship there freely, and they do that as they govern the site each day. In fact, they prevent Jews from entering the site and Christians from entering the site. That is the Dome of the Rock. So this is the propaganda. You can see this in protest and rallies they have, stomping the Israeli flag, carrying the Dome of the Rock. And that's what makes the Temple Mount the most volatile 36 acres on earth. And since the Temple Mount is at the center of biblical prophecy, it becomes even more important in this whole discussion. For more than just the fact that the Palestinians contest it, it's contested throughout the Islamic world. Here is Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is who is the Prime Minister of Turkey. And he said at the end of March 2018 that they should form a 5 million man Islamic army to simultaneously attack Israel from multiple fronts. He said, each day that Jerusalem is under occupation is an insult to us. And then he has an obsession to take Jerusalem. He has called on Muslims to protect Al-Aqsa. So he has a vested interest in this, even from his area of Turkey. And of course, he's trying to change Turkey from the sort of Western influenced country that it used to be to now more of a radical Islamic country going back to the time of the Ottoman Empire. You have in Iran the same thing. Imam Khomeini said in just October 3rd, only 4 days before this violent attack, he called the Zionist usurpers a cancer. He said it will definitely be eradicated, God willing, to the hands of the Palestinian people and resistance forces throughout the region. Back in 2015, the Iranians produced a film saying Israel must be obliterated, but the Iranian video depicted a Muslim invasion of Jerusalem. These aren't things you are hearing in the major media, but I wanted to present that because that is a cause for this battle that has been unexplored, but in fact is what those who brought about this war say is the cause.
So let's move on to the next question. So how can we understand the horrific brutality by Hamas?
Yeah, this is very difficult for the Western mind or even the Eastern mind to conceive. Ron Dermer, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., now with a position in the Israeli government, said Hamas is not just a terrorist organization, they're a genocidal organization. And an IDF general said this is not a war, it's not a battlefield, it's a massacre. Because I won't go through and list this. I don't know who may be listening to this particular recording, but if you have heard what Israel has shown of the attack, I mean, the awful things that have happened, and I won't even go through the list because it's something that you don't even talk about in polite company, but it is horrific to the max. For that reason, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, Hamas is ISIS, must be treated that way. If you remember some of the reports of the day on October 7th, the attackers had ISIS flags in their backpacks, and they hung them on fences and then left them at the site of the attack itself. When we think of ISIS, we think of a terrorist organization that was involved in beheading, horrible things, burning people, all the things that they did. This is Hamas. Now, if you listen to Hamas, here is leader Ismail Haniyeh saying, we love death like our enemies love life. Or we love martyrdom, the way in which Hamas leaders died. This is something that is extolled, glorified, praised, and it's hard for us to understand that. And I'll get to that a little later. But it's specifically why were the Jewish Israelis murdered the way they were. And here's the reason, again, religious. The divine punishment of Jews is mentioned in 3 Quranic verses. They are those who Allah has cast aside and on whom his wrath is fallen, and of whom he has made some as apes and swine. Surely you have known the end of those. Be ye like apes, despised. And so if you look at some of these speeches given throughout the Islamic world, Allah transformed you into apes and pigs. He made you apes and pigs and slaves of deities. They are indeed descendants of apes and pigs. These warmongers, the descendants of apes and pigs. In other words, all of the Israelis, all Jewish people throughout the world, are considered on a genetic level non-human. They are themselves animals, and they're despised animals, and they are ritually unclean animals. And so, how do you treat an animal? You slaughter an animal. That's the idea here. That's what ISIS did, and that's again the Quran says this: "I shall cast into unbelievers' hearts terror, so smite them above the necks and smite every finger of them." And if you notice, if you read some of the detailed reports, not only did they behead lots and lots of people from infants on, but they also cut off their hands. And this was to comply with religious, text. They believe them, they obey them. And so while they would do this to Jewish children, they would go home and embrace their own children. Now, how can this kind of barbaric mutilation be done by a human being? Is because they're indoctrinated from a young age. And let me give you a report here. This was recorded. There are organizations like Memory and others who record every Arabic program broadcast throughout the Middle East and archive them. And so on this show, this was a Muslim woman magazine TV program aired in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And they were interviewing a 3.5-year-old real Muslim girl about the Jews. The girl was asked whether she liked Jews. She answered no. When asked why she didn't like them, she said that the Jews were apes and pigs. Who said this? The moderator asked. The girl answered, our God. Where did he say this? In the Quran. At the end of the interview, the pleased moderator said, no parents could wish for Allah to give them a more believing girl than she. May Allah bless her, her father and mother. The next generation of children must be true Muslims. We must educate them now where they are children, so they'll be true Muslims. And so when you talk about the training, Hamas teens, from young teens on, are in training camps to spread jihad over the world. They go from school to these training camps. That's been going on in Gaza for a long, long time and throughout other parts of the Palestinian territories. This is just something that is done, and and parents think this is some of the highest honor for their kids. One reason is because throughout the Islamic world, if you die as a martyr, then there is a financial return to your family. Different people used to give $25,000. Others gave more money on a regular basis. In other words, they were taken care of, paid for this. They had parties. They put up the pictures of their martyred teens and youth throughout the cities. And you don't have in some of these places really any other way to attain fame. You're not going to play basketball or sports or anything else. So this is the way to get not only paradise, but also take care of your family and get some legacy. All of this is wrapped together. One of the videos produced by Hamas on the day of the attack, October 7th, had one man standing with a pile of bodies behind him, bragging that he had killed 10 people, and he told his parents, "I know you'll be proud of me now." Okay, so this is the kind of thing that goes on. Very hard for us to understand this in the West, but this is the mentality of these people in the Middle East, particularly because of the religion of Islam. And this is not an attack on Islam. It's simply to understand Islam. This is what motivated these things: jihad and martyrdom. All right. So I think that helps us a little bit, hopefully understand why something that seems totally out of our ability to understand happened. And it happened because of the desire to carry out or act out the duty of their religious text.
All right. Thank you very much, Randall. Let's move on to the next question. Why have we seen a surge of anti-Semitism even in U.S. campuses?
This is also somewhat hard for us to understand, but let's look at it for a minute. Anti-Semitism has been surging worldwide. You look at these posters, "Keep the world clean." That is, you dispose of Jews as though they're trash, carrying Hamas signs. From all across the Middle East, you can look at these various places: Paris, Munich, Australia. Australia, particularly in Sydney, had huge meetings in which they were chanting, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." Iran, other places, Egypt, Afghanistan, all of these places across the world are responding this way. I have a friend who is a missionary in the Middle East, and he wrote me saying, "Sadly, a healthy and balanced perspective is often one of the first casualties of war. Everyone feels pressured into taking sides without really understanding the local context and historical backdrop, and usually based only on partial, if not biased, news reports. This is particularly true across the Middle East, where most feel obliged to side with the Palestinians in a show of Muslim solidarity. Many did not even hear of the grotesque attacks perpetrated by Hamas in Israel, and are only reacting to the IDF's bombardment of Gaza. Because in these places, media is controlled, it's censored, it is restricted, and these people have not heard this at all because all they hear is what they hear on the Muslim street." But look at the United States. 48% support Palestine, 38% support Israel. And when you look at this, this was right the day after the attack. This is in New York City. You have these kind of things. You've seen them on the news. Why is this? It's particularly in the college campuses, university campuses. Here's a list of some of the universities that have had these pro Palestinian pro-Hamas protest. Some of our Ivy League schools are all listed. When you talk about Berkeley and Yale and Harvard and Kent and Columbia, University of Chicago, all these ones. Look at these. And so Wall Street Journal opinion actually said Hamas war shows us what American universities stand for. Ideologies become more important than scholarship, and political correctness dominates decision making to the point that calling an act of terror is to risk upsetting significant numbers of students and faculty. We've looked at that, so I'm going the wrong way, pardon me. Let's see. U.S. colleges churn out terrorist sympathizers. And it really is that way, because there is no sense of trying to see another side. It is all this way from here with California to Virginia to New York to Seattle. All of these universities having these protests, even to the point where you can catch on video students going and ripping down Israeli hostage posters. They should be saying, well, these are people that were taken and kidnapped. We should think about them, pray for them. No, they're ripping those posters down as though this never happened. Here are some students. Israel as a state is built on the colonialization and apartheid state, okay? So this is what they believe. It's what they're taught. Here, another student says, we striked out first because we wanted our land back. This is the belief. This is what they think is going on. If you look at how this support is ranked, when we start, those who are the oldest, baby boomers, whatever, they tend to 86% support Israel in this. All right. Gen X, 63%. It drops a little more. By the time you come to Gen Z as millennials, it's 48%. And if you go a little before that, it drops even lower. So why is it with decrease in age that we find this? Well, it has to do with the educational system. It has to do with things that did not exist 10 years ago, even before COVID, but exist now. The Western world is woke and indoctrinated against facts and logic. Let me explain. First, the Western world view is more cultural than biblical. Despite our Judaic-Christian foundation, when modern culture is in opposition to biblical revelation, culture wins. That's what we see. You line it up. That's why you have people who are deconstructing their faith, because they look at the culture and the Bible is so much in opposition to it that they can't accept the Bible. So the concept of a chosen people, that is Israel, is viewed as racist. The war to remove those who seek Israel's extermination, fighting back, which should be considered a just act, is viewed as genocide, even though it's one-sided. Even though the others who try to do it are not considered, they're considered resistance and justified. Biblical historical right to the land of Israel is viewed as colonialization and occupation. And by the way, this is true for both Christians and secularists in this age group. The younger generation has been indoctrinated for decades with a worldview of the oppressed versus the oppressors. That is, they've been taught that those who are deprived, who are lacking something, who have need, are not responsible themselves for their situation, but some greater outside agent. So the United States, as Israel, is an oppressor and colonializer. We are the ones occupied and causing these problems. So therefore, any means of resistance and ultimate replacement by the oppressed is justifiable. We also can see the younger generation evaluates truth from a relative rather than absolute, and subjective rather than objective perspective. In other words, this is a major shift in the way people think. But as a result, social justice, or rather injustice, is determined by how others perceive or feel about their situation. rather than look at the facts of what's really going on between the Palestinians and Israelis, because the Palestinians are viewed to be deprived and suffering, their situation has to be correct. You have to take up the mantle of their support. So therefore, they don't search for facts, but they declare solidarity based on these feelings. Also, Western democratic, multicultural, pluralistic worldview is completely unknown and opposed in most of the Middle East. This is the problem. We don't think like they think. We're not raised like they are. We're in a privileged, democratic, free society. They are not. The majority of people in the Middle East are Muslim. They do not value individuality. They must conform to the Islamic world that denounces democracy and free expression. If they do not, then they don't survive. This even applies to haircuts. If you get your haircut as a male in a different way than other Muslims are, it's actually a Muslim cut, not only will you be in trouble, but the barbershop could be burned down and someone actually killed for doing that. So Westerners value life, whereas Muslims, especially Wahhabis, value death and martyrdom, which is the means to paradise. That's a totally different way of thinking in a worldview than what we hold. Finally, moral equivalency is misunderstood. Hamas's actions are said to be reinforcing a shared pathology. In other words, people treated like animals act like animals. And therefore, this is a rage of resistance against Israeli ethnic cleansing. However, proportionality must be considered, as well as motive and method. Muslims think in terms of religious duty to murder and massacre as prescribed by the Quran. And there's nothing like that. The Israelis are calculated. They surgically strike. They protect citizens. They call ahead. They do everything possible to minimize collateral damage in terms of citizens. This is the way it's always been, even to a fault, even to losing some of the primary, let's say, objects of their attack. And that is the leadership, because families or other people are present. By contrast, Hamas and these other organizations place their military establishments and all of their missile bombardments and things underneath hospitals, underneath schools, underneath private homes, also that they can have a greater collateral damage. That's why they don't allow people to leave. That's why there was statements made to the citizens of Gaza, do not leave. And they've been even trying to prevent some who have tried to get out. So you can see they want to use that collateral damage as a way of projecting cruelty on Israel. We look at some of this is almost very hypocritical. Here are the signs. Zionism is genocide. And then when you look at signs like this, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. What is the river to the sea? The River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. What exists between those two bodies of water is Israel itself. If you're going to free what they call Palestine, you have to remove Israel. And you're not going to remove it to somewhere else. You're going to completely annihilate it. So to call the Zionists, those who practice genocide, and at the same time be calling for genocide is quite hypocritical. That's why the first thing to die in a war is often the truth. And you see this. This free Palestine is a code for kill the Jews. This is the idea. And you can see this blatantly being displayed. Hamas leaders called the slaughter of Israeli civilians a dream come true. So you can see they brought about this glory, they called it. That's very interesting, because yesterday at George Washington University, you had messages projected on the library building that said, "Glory to our martyrs," and "Divest from Zionist genocide," or "Free Palestine from liberty to the sea." These are the kind of things being done in our country at our educational institutions now. And one of the worst I saw was this statement, "I stand with Palestine," and showed this kind of parachuting way is the way that the attackers came into that youth festival, music festival, and slaughtered over 220 people. So to show that kind of image and say I stand with Palestine means you stand with terrorism and massacre. Okay, so I hope that gives us a little bit of insight into this whole issue of the brutality that's hard to explain otherwise.
All right. So let's move ahead. These are, these are so upsetting, and yet it's so important that that people hear what you're saying. So I'm really impressed with your presentation. It's so kind of hard to explain it. It just speaks truth. So let's go ahead. How might this war affect Americans?
All right, I'm sure that's something all of us have thought very deeply about, and we still don't have complete answers to this, but we can at least see the trajectory that is going on. Throughout the Middle East, we realize that they don't say just death to Israel, they say death to America. That's the chance. America is the great Satan, as Israel is the little Satan. In fact, in the Quran, there's a statement, it's very interesting. It says, Muslims do not make friends of Jews or Christians, for they are friends of each other. Now that's, that may be difficult to understand because of the history of anti-Semitism between Christians and Jews, but nevertheless, from the Islamic point of view, we have that in common because, after all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and these are certainly the enemies. Now, the U.S. State Department has issued in recent days worldwide caution travel alert from the global tensions. This is for Americans traveling anywhere in the world right now. So, and why is this? Well, for some various reasons. Our embassies have been under attack. U.S. military bases in the Middle East have been under attack. Now, these are some of the military attacks that have put troops in the Mideast on alert. You can see these air bases all across the Middle East are presently threatened. And then we have put aircraft carriers in the Gulf near the Black Sea. These are because of these attacks. This is a show of force, particularly to the Iranians, who are backing much of the terrorists. So the U.S. has strengthened its posture in the Middle East. This, of course, involves us at some point being engaged in the conflict itself, if something goes on. So here we have these carriers in the Gulf of Aden. We have them up in the Persian Gulf, around the Gulf of Suez. All of this up in the Mediterranean. All of this is there, and of course, they're there with a purpose. These destroyers are formidable agents of war. Iranian proxies and their affiliates in the Middle East have begun to act. Yemen, where Hezbollah is in Lebanon and Yemen and in Syria and all over, Iran particularly. All of these, from Yemen, we've had attacks now, missiles being fired, also from Syria, particularly from Lebanon. That's been engaged over days and days now. And some of this is happening in the West Bank as well. So if you look at this came from Fox News, speaking about how Iranian weapons are fueling fears of a new war front. This is the big problem, war on two fronts, one in the south with Gaza, one in the north with Lebanon. But then, of course, if we engage Gaza, that is going to force the hand of not only Lebanon, but also Iran. If we force the hand of Iran, then we have to deal with Iran's allies, who are Turkey and Russia. So this really involves a major problem. Hezbollah's rocket attacks have been taking place, and because they they are a much more formidable enemy than Hamas. They have arsenals that can reach down to the very south of Israel. They can hit Jerusalem. Doubt that they would hit Jerusalem, because that's their main concern, but they can hit all over. Now we're talking about a regional conflict. You see Iran praising Hamas for its attacks around the Middle East. You see their foreign minister warning Israel from Beirut to stop the Gaza attacks or risk a huge earthquake. And so they're using their revisionist rhetoric here about defenseless citizens and people of Gaza. But of course, they're trapped there because of Hamas. They're in the situation they've always been because of Hamas. The only way to free Palestine is to free it from Hamas at this point, or from others as well. But they're talking about this huge earthquake that Israel would suffer if, in fact, they take the next step to invade Gaza in this house-to-house war, or they retaliate against Lebanon. We've had just yesterday, the Biden administration, but particularly our Secretary of State, has stated that the United States vows swift response to Iran. Now, what kind of response is that going to be? That's difficult to say, but if it becomes military, you have a regional conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered fighter jets with hypersonic missiles to patrol the Black Sea in response to the chaos in the Middle East. He's not saying this is anything other than simply we simply are positioning our forces. But this is ominous. A bigger problem. Under the Biden administration, we have over 1.7 million known gotaways. These are people we consider a problem. 150 plus members of terror watch list were arrested at the border in the fiscal year of 2023, this year. And we have all these others that got away. Now, special interest aliens, these are people who have known terrorist connections, have come from all these various countries and have entered the United States since 2021. Most of them, we don't know where they are. Okay, so you just look at that, that's a pretty scary thing. If you look at terrorist networks in America that exist all throughout the United States, these are organizations that are known, have been practicing for decades in the United States. They were there before 9/11. They're still there. All right, they're carrying on their own activities. And if you just simply Google this Hamas networks in America, you'll get a whole publication on this that tells you where these are and what they've been doing. There's a whole history of that available. So that was just put up this month, but it's all there if you want to cite that. Now, could there be Iranian sleeper cells in the United States? Well, in July of 2022, a video showed hundreds of children singing an ode to Qasem Soleimani and Iran's supreme leader Khamenei with lyrics, "I will be your soldier, I will be your martyr." Where was that? In Tehran? No, it was in Houston, Texas. So a friend from Houston, a pastor there, sent me this. And that's taking place right here, right now. These terrorist organizations are waging a religious war. It's time the world understood this. Now, if Israel enters Gaza, takes out Hamas, it will remove Iran's access to Israel. Iranian-backed Hezbollah, currently shelling the north, is thought to be planning a major assault if Israel enters Gaza. That would put Iran directly in the fight, which would obligate Iran's allies, Russia, Turkey, and China, to join the conflict. In fact, China has already been strengthening their military ties with Iran, and they have it's highly concerning that they have aircraft intercepts by Chinese planes, the Pentagon says. So these are things happening right now. Some have asked, and these are secularists, are we headed for World War III? Or could we already be in World War III? All right, Iran warns of escalation and deploys weapons in Syria if the U.S. sends a second carrier. This was just from a few days ago, how the Israeli-Hamas war is tilting the global power balance in favor of Russia and China. And then the Russian-Iran axis is fomenting war in the Middle East. The Ukrainians, particularly Zelensky, has been citing this, saying that the only reason Russia is wanting to this, they've been igniting a war in the Middle East, is to cause pain and suffering, which will weaken world unity. Now, there's always bigger players in this. Whether you believe a conspiracy or not, we know there's a satanic agenda that Satan is trying to bring on a global scale, chaos, and to bring out of that a world leader of his choosing. We also have elitists and globalists and people who are very actively talking today, from Klaus Schwab to others, about the dates of 2025 or 2030 as being key dates in which America will be eclipsed and taken over and other things happening. Not that it will happen, but I'm just saying these are things that are being said. So that puts us in a very concerning posture, hopefully one for prayer as well.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. What may happen next, both globally and prophetically?
Well, this is our last question, and it's appropriate that it is last. It's important to understand what first we see on a global stage, but also what we see within God's Word. When we talk about biblical prophecy, we are talking about things that happened in a prophetic period known as the last days. And according to Scripture, we have been living in the last days since our Christ left this world, and that is a period of time that extends into his second coming. The time after the last days is what's called the end times. There's an end time for the church, there's an end time for Israel, because I think those are to be understood differently in God's prophetic plan. But nevertheless, these are exciting times leading up to the return of Christ, establishment of his kingdom on earth. Daniel 2 had said that there's going to be these final kingdoms of man, and the final kingdom of man, which will be a dominating kingdom, an oppressive kingdom, will be overthrown finally by the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ. We look at Israel. Israel is an epicenter. There's no other way of looking at it. It's at the center of God's fulfillment for his plan on planet Earth. When we talk about what has happened in the last 2,000 years, 2,000 years ago, Israel was the center of prophecy. Israel was there. The Messiah, Jesus, came to that place. But then it began to, the focus began to shift from the Middle East to the West, to Europe, to America. And that has been the dominant focus up until recent times. Now the focus is shifting back to the Middle East, because that is the stage in which everything will be concluded. And so, like bookends, Israel is there at the beginning and at the end. And so God's plan is what fills the in-between. So this is the epicenter for the final fulfillment of God's plans on planet Earth, and Jerusalem is at the center of all of that, which ties in what we mentioned earlier about the Temple Mount. When we talk about the end times, this time that is still future to us, prophetic events tend to cast their shadows before them. We can't clearly see them. They're there. But because nothing happens overnight, it may take decades, sometimes even generations, for some of these events to be put into place, such as Jews returning to the land of Israel, to become a state again, to put things under their control, and coming in unbelief, something the Bible said would happen. All of these things are things that we have seen begin to lay the foundation or set the stage for these end time events, which we're seeing really more in a shadow form. So it's very important when we look at prophetic events to understand how to interpret them. We're looking at current events right now, and we're trying to see if there's something in them that has meaning for the future. So we need to interpret current events in the light of the Bible, not the Bible in light of current events. That's a major rule. Yes, we see things that seem to make us anxious and seem to correlate with things in the Bible. We've got to be sure we understand the biblical text first, and then see if the events have some meaning. Second, we need to be sure the biblical text provides enough data draw a correspondence with current events. Not just one little event is enough. We need, because we can misread it. So we need to see a complete picture. And then the fulfillment of prophetic events related to Israel will not take place until after the age of the church. My understanding of this is we have the age of the church followed by the time we call the tribulation, climaxed by the second coming of Christ, and then Christ establishing his millennial kingdom. Not all see it that way, but as I look at the Bible in a literal way, the same way people interpret, shall we say, Genesis 1 through 11, and see that in a literal way, in a historical way. I see literal prophecy fulfilled in that way. So we talk about the coming invasion of Israel. We do have a passage in the Old Testament, in Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, which talk about this. Let me look at it just quick, because it talks about Israel being attacked from multiple fronts. And it gives us the names of the countries that will be behind this attack. Okay? The major leader in the attack will be a place called Magog. Okay? And a leader named Gog from Magog will lead the attack. He'll be joined by Persia, and he'll be joined by other places which geographically today have other names. So let's look at that, because it's very important. But first, the biblical text. The biblical text says, the Lord said, "Lo, I'm coming to deal with you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Among them shall be Persia, Cush, and Put, Gomer, all its cohorts, Beth Togarmah, and the remotest parts of the north, and then it's north of Israel, and all its cohorts, the many peoples with you. And you will come from your home in the farthest north, you and many peoples with you, a mighty army, and you will advance upon my people Israel like a cloud covering the earth." So who are these peoples? Well, if we look at the ancient name, and then we look at the modern nation that inhabits that place, if it was fulfilled in our time, these would be the people it's speaking of. So there's a lot of linguistic and other things that go around this. I've written on this in several places, a commentary on Ezekiel, some other material on this, but basically we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have the Sudan and Libya, which includes Yemen. And it's not hard to see that all of these are major players right now in this attack on Israel. They have made an alliance between themselves. This happened a number of years ago, and they have since developed military alliances as well. So what happens to one obligates the other to be involved. Erdogan has consolidated power in Turkey. He's built an Islamic Republic aligned against Israel. His relationship with Putin is strong and growing. All it takes right now is a clear break between Turkey and NATO to permanently move Turkey into Russia's sphere of influence. So this is something that's happening. Turkey's prime minister in Iran calls for a nuclear program, certainly in Iran, but something that will aid and abet Turkey as well. So this is something happening. And then here, Russia is broking a new Iran nuclear agreement. That's what we've seen happening, is we've tried to stop with our sanctions. Actually, sanctions only hurt the local population, which we hoped would cause them to be so oppressed and so upset they would revolt against their government, but that doesn't happen, not in Islamic countries. And so Iran continued right on with building up their arsenals, their cyber warfare, and probably their nuclear program as well. So they're in a very strong position. And Russia is too. Russia is as strong as it was back in the 80s. We, by contrast, are at the weakest point we've ever been. Our military only has about 300 to 400,000 active men. According to statistics, 70% of our military is overweight or obese. They're not trained in the type of combat that this will be had. If something happens, by the way, with regional conflict, first thing that's going to be shut off is the Gulf of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes monthly. They Same thing will happen with the Suez, no access for oil. We already have drained our oil reserves in the United States. That's a big economic problem for the United States that would happen. We also have a problem that most of our military stock has been invested in Ukraine. And so we have some real issues with things if something like this were to happen. So what that means is that Israel's Western defense cannot be counted on. And it would be an ideal time for an invasion like this to happen. One of the scholars in Israel, Adam Berkowitz, wrote an article on this. He says, the main thing is what is happening over here. It's not a matter of whether or not the war of Gog and Magog is coming. It's a matter of time. And at this point, we are counting the days. Now, whether that is the fact or not, God can intervene. We may or may not be on the brink of that. But we do have one biblical text with enough detail to say what is happening today lines up. How interesting it is that a prophecy given 2,500 years ago would have such amazing accuracy to have the coincidence, if you want to call it that, of what has happened in the Middle East right now. We know that at the end of this, we'll see the coming of our Lord Jesus. It says, and the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. And that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. Let me tell you, why would the Lord choose to return to Jerusalem if it had no currency or meaning or value? It has every bit of that in God's plan. You can't write Jerusalem out of this future program. And it says in that day, he will fight for them and will have tremendous events happen. But what are we to do? Let me just conclude this with two practical things. First, we need to pray for Israel's physical survival. Psalms 122, 6 through 9 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If Jerusalem is the axis of this conflict, praying for how God is going to resolve that in the future means that he'll resolve that in such a way, because if we have peace there, we'll have peace everywhere. So it says, may there be prosperity in your palaces for the sake of my brothers and my friends. And we certainly, if we're friends of Israel, are part of that. He says, I will now say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord, that's the temple of our God, I seek your good. So whatever you may think about these things, Israel right now is in a place of facing its extinction, its annihilation. That's what's being called for. And so we need to pray for its physical survival. We have friends doing that. In New York, where you've seen protests, you've also seen support for Israel here in Times Square or in other places. So there is support on that side. It says American support for Israel is among the highest ever recorded. You see it in other parts. Germany, here's the Brandenburg Gate. Right around the corner is the Nazi Reichstag. Surprisingly, but here it's lit up. And you have conferences. This is from a conference in Germany this last week. Everybody holding up signs saying, I support Israel. Lithuania, of all things, showing support for Israel by lighting up its national building. So this is happening around the world because people do care, and we should care as well. One reason is because Genesis 12, 2 through 3 says, I will make of you, that is, this is the promise to Abraham, who is the father of the Jewish people. I will make of you a great nation. That's the nation of Israel. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Okay, Israel is a blessing. It's not a curse. It's not an occupier. It's a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. Now, Israel's not perfect. It's a secular state. It has as many violations and as much wokeism and stuff as the rest of this world has. But it is chosen by God with a purpose. It has a destiny in his plan. They're also being disciplined at the present time because they violated God's covenant. But yet God is faithful to his own covenant. Unconditionally, it stands. And he will be faithful to it to finally, he's brought Israel back to the land in their unbelief. And there one day he will bring all Israel to a place of repentance. And he will bring his Messiah back there for that purpose. So it says, in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. All of us are part of those families of the earth. If we want to be blessed, then we need to bless Israel. A second thing is we need to pray for Israel's spiritual salvation, because the greatest thing you can do for a Jewish person is pray that they come to know their Messiah, who is the source of eternal life. Romans 10:1 is Paul's own statement. He says, "Brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer for God to them is for their salvation." So I pray that not only we pray for Israel physically, but pray for them spiritually. And as a result of that, then we will see God work in the way he has planned and promised. You want more information about this? Edited a book with 22 other scholars from all over Israel, Jordan, and Europe to give details about the Jewish people. This, by the way, was written to the younger generation. That demographic is not supporting Israel today. It was written to help them, particularly millennials and Gen Zers, come to understand the facts and hopefully support it. If you want a little more information, I have a ministry called World of the Bible Ministries. If you go to worldofthebible.com, you'll be able to find a lot of resources, also that are free and helpful. Well, that's what I had, John. You have a way of closing us out?
Yes, indeed. I'd just like to say I am so grateful for you. That's clearly the most informative presentation I've ever heard in terms of what's happening in these times. And so let me say a prayer and we'll be done. Lord Jesus, I'm so grateful for Randall Price, Lord. I'm thankful that you have trained him and that you have prepared him and that he is such an effective spokesman for truth as it relates to our faith and the faith of many. And Lord, as we watch all this evil and all the things that are happening, everything in the world seems to be upside down, Lord, and many people are just filled with fear and angst, and sometimes I feel that way too. And Lord, what's special about the people who trust in Jesus is that we let him do the heavy lifting. We trust him in what we should do. And Lord, we know that you have great plans for us, but that there will be also great trouble, Lord. And so strengthen us, make us wise in a world that is so confused. We just praise your holy name, Jesus. Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Randall.
You're most welcome.